Which is more powerful, fear or hope? This is an essential question that your students will never forget and will have a really hard time having no opinion about. This is what makes having essential questions as the cornerstone of our curriculum so incredibly powerful. And in terms of inquiry, this is a rich and deep question to dive into with our students. And so I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking you through the different directions that this unit can go, and also the different levels of complexity and depth that are available to you by using this essential question. I'm going to start with a little caveat, and that is the humans in your room will always make the most important decisions for you. When you start this unit and you start going through it and you're prepared with all these ideas, remember to listen, remember to slow down and listen to what your students are telling you. Because we might be somewhere in our head with this question, but their experiences, their current state of mind, the current state of the world in which you are, the way that the world is in the moment that you're teaching this unit might bear more weight sometimes than others. So remember, with essential questions, the whole idea is to have organic, curiosity-driven classroom discussions. So if we take away that organic piece, things start to kind of fall apart. At the same time, and the reason that you're here and the reason that I create these essential question adventure packs is that you want to be ready. You want to be ready to facilitate the conversation and not just sit back. I remember when I first heard about inquiry-driven teaching and that students are the ones doing all of the learning and the asking all the questions, I thought, well, then what do? Am I constantly playing catch up to whatever they happen to be interested in? And the answer to that is no, not at all. We still create and design our unit around this essential question, but instead of having it be this prescriptive way that it has to get done, we in turn are creating opportunities to veer into multiple different directions as the learning is happening. So let's kind of break it down into two kind of directions that we could feel out this unit depending on the either whole text novel that you're using or a memoir that you're using, if it's whole class versus lit circles. There's a lot of things to consider when you are using this essential question, and none of them are wrong answers. So these are just options. Okay, so when I designed this essential question, I really had two different ways of using it in mind. And I'm really thinking of two different groups of students and two different needs that you might have in your curriculum. So the first of which is kind of the more severe and intense angle. It's the, really leaning into the ways in which fear and hope are manipulated or are used in rhetoric to either subdue a population, or I'm thinking a lot about the ways that, little bits of hope can be sprinkled to falsely get a group of people to do something because of a small little impossible promise. Kind of like the negative, dirty, ugly side of how these things are used. Now, that might sound like a really sad way to spend a few weeks. However, I think that the amazing silver lining in this vein of thinking is that knowledge, information, and knowing truth is the best way to overcome, right, being manipulated by fear. So, I'm thinking about things like propaganda. If you're looking at any kind of the world wars, history, if you're looking at a historical context, there are certainly examples of modern propaganda you can be looking at. Dictatorships, if there are any dictatorships at the heart of something that you're reading, this angle could be really, really powerful. Looking at just kind of like fear and the way that that's applied to masculinity and femininity, I think is really interesting. I see this a lot in advertising. The way that groups are oppressed a lot of times can come through fear-mongering or creating fear-based scenarios or false hope created scenarios. Then there's also the mob mentality, I think falls really nicely under this category. And you've got an interesting dynamic between leadership and audience, or the bystanders, or the people participating and the people who are in charge. That dynamic is really interesting to explore in the ways in which people both use fear and hope and respond to fear and hope. That audience-speaker relationship is very, very interesting. And I think that the destruction or limitation of hope used as a weapon is its own very fascinating category. So in this realm, you've got a lot to explore. And like I said, I think that the silver lining, or the way that this kind of circles back to a more positive outlook and a more empowering way of moving forward, is that when our students learn how fear and hope are manipulated, the hope is that when we get back to the reality side, their own experience side of things, that they know how it's happening to them. And they know that, I'm really nervous about doing X, Y, and Z, that they know that their next step is not to just stay in fear, but to go do some research, or to go do some reading, or to cross-reference, to look at the credibility of the speaker, that they're learning these kind of lifelong tools about how to give weight to that when they're actually experiencing it for themselves. I know during the pandemic, I had talked to a lot of people about this. We were all much more fearful at the start of the pandemic when we had very little information. We had talking heads on TV. We had, kind of had to scramble and figure out whose information we were going to trust, and really think about how to sort through that onslaught of fear. And then as things have moved forward, we've been given lots more information, which is its own struggle, sorting through all of that. But generally speaking, more information, more research, and more knowledge helps to really kind of subside a lot of the extreme fears and get things back to kind of a more practical and even state of mind where we can have conversations and not have reactions. The other way I think that this unit would go really well with students is looking at things like motivation. What are the things that motivate us for our own futures, for how we act, for how characters act? This can be very lighthearted and fun. Especially I have a gateway activity planned for this unit where students are looking at a scenario. My parents want me to get good grades. What's more likely to get me to act the way that they want to? Threatening me with something or rewarding me with something? There's a lot of really interesting psychological ways to look at this, and really leaning into this idea of perseverance and resilience, the desire to change. A lot of our characters have very complex characterization in them, and looking at what motivates this character to adapt or change in their situation. Who are they changing for? What are they changing for? And kind of bringing these down to the more personal fears and hopes that we have in our own lives, and not that the Holocaust and a lot of people are going to be using Unbroken and Elie Wiesel and these kind of extreme versions of fear and hope in a very big global aspect. But we also need to give our students the space to think about, I'm really afraid of getting rejected to college, or I'm really nervous about getting rejected by another person and not having a particular friendship that's important to me. The fears and hopes on the personal level are really, really important for kids to have time to process through and, have that social, emotional learning opportunity, and especially in terms of their vocabulary and what they're reading and how they sort through all of that. Looking at things like a personal memoir and journeys, goal setting and future planning. I think all of these things are really remarkable ways of using this essential question with maybe a set of lit circle books. Maybe that fits better there. Maybe you have a great whole class novel for going that angle. I just wanted to make sure that you have two different ways of approaching this essential question without feeling like you're forced into one or the other. You might even blend those two together. You've got a lot of options, and that is the beauty of the Essential Question Adventure Pack. So a couple of things that I also wanted to remind you is to look at the complexity. So as we know, students like shortcuts. They like to say, I don't know, or yeah, or nah, and then be done. They don't like to elaborate unless we're prodding a little bit. So with this question of which is more powerful, fear or hope, a really important part of this particular unit comes at the beginning with defining fear and hope more broadly. Even though the question presents these two things as binary or polar opposites, we actually want to create comfort in that gray area, and that will come through some vocabulary work. So take the time to have students break down what does fear look like? What are the different versions of fear, right? What's the difference between scared and horrified, timid and nervous? What are all those different versions of fear? And kind of getting those onto a scale or getting those up onto one of your anchor charts so that when we talk about fear, we're not always talking about one extreme, but we have different versions of fear. Same with hope. Hope, dreams, anticipation, excitement. Those are all different versions of hope that kind of take us out of feeling pigeonholed in just that one word. So create some gray area for students to work with, because I think when you have an either or essential question, really the opportunity presents itself for you to teach counter argument. We don't want students to end up on one or the other. We don't want them to say, it's hope, bye, see ya. No, we're gonna pull them back in and we're gonna tell them, okay, it's mostly hope, but with the exception of this, or it's mostly fear, but under the conditions of A, B, and C. If these are not happening, then actually it's hope. We want to get our hands dirty with that middle ground, especially in terms of writing and discussion. So whether it's Socratic Seminar Fishbowl or you're doing some kind of synthesis essay where you're bringing everything together, the sources of what are inside the essential pack, also anything else that you bring in, the things that are on the choice board, those are all meant to give depth and complexity to that answer. So, we can say, if you're living in a Hunger Games scenario, yes, fear is going to be X, Y, and Z. However, most of us don't actually live in Panem, and in the real world, this is what it looks like. So students can begin with an example of one and then blend into the others, or vice versa. Keep an open mind as students explore this question and let them get messy. And again, take the opportunity to teach counter argument, rebuttal, counter claims, which is another way of saying counter argument. Giving them those chances is a rich and powerful opportunity that an either or kind of question offers you. So does it to what extent, but I actually prefer when it comes to counter argument using an either or. So make sure that your students know that all of that wrestling is where the money is. That is beautiful. And that as you're using your evidence tracker, that's exactly what that evidence tracker is for. That evidence tracker is to say, okay, here's where it works, here's where it doesn't, here's something that complicates that, and you're kind of constantly checking in with all of the evidence presented. I am so thrilled that you have taken a chance on this essential question, that you're ready to jump in. I know you're going to do wonderful things, and I can't wait to hear all about them. Thank you so much for being here and watching this video today, and I look forward to catching up with you more in the next Essential Question Adventure Pack.